Welcome to the Unbranded Leadership Podcast, where we discuss anything and everything about leadership, as well as how we can grow on our individual leadership journeys. I'm your host, Mike DeStefano, and on today's episode, I'm excited to say that we're going to be talking about the entire beginning of this podcast, or what led to it anyway, which is my doctoral research project. The process of it, the research that was conducted, as well as the findings. So stay tuned. This is going to be an exciting episode. Mike DeStefano here with the Unbranded Leadership Podcast. I wanted to take a second to thank our sponsor, Recruit Strength, out of Melbourne, Florida. Recruit Strength is a strength training gym that offers 24-hour access to its members, as well as online and in-person strength and conditioning coaching. For more information or to contact them and get set up, visit recruitstrength.com. All right, guys. So let's dig into this a little bit and give you a quick brief history on this. For those that don't know, um, before I began this whole entire Unbranded Leadership podcast thing, I was deep into studying leadership from the level of, podcasts, books, observation, mentoring, coaching, things like that. For the last decade, I've been writing for Fire Engineering, Fire Rescue Magazine, Firefighter Nation, articles on leadership as well as training. So it's definitely been a passion of mine, of leadership. Um, about 2.5 years ago, I started going to Liberty University for the Doctorate in Strategic Leadership program. And this is kind of the accumulation of it. This is the culmination of it, the final product of everything that I did and I researched for it, which is the doctoral research project here that I'm presenting today. So just a quick background on it. This project is basically what led to the idea that we needed to have this podcast in the first place, because of the fact that the podcast illuminates the training and the behaviors that we look for in a leader, and how to really motivate and lead people within not only the fire service, but in business in general, and everything, every aspect of our lives. So with that being said, let's dig into it a little bit, because this is my doctoral research project that I completed for Liberty University. And real quick, the reason why I haven't given this information out yet, or produced, or talked about this in its entirety, is because of the fact that up until about 3 weeks ago, I was still in the program. I wanted to wait until everything was completely done, everything was signed off. And about 3 weeks ago, I was able to defend/present the project. And shortly after was conferred the degree, which means I am completed with Liberty University. And now I can talk about this because I didn't want any edits to occur or any things to come out where I needed to change something in it. But now that it is accepted, it's signed off, everything is beautiful. Let's talk about it. So, first and foremost, what is the study? So, the study is titled Fire Department Leadership: Understanding the Influence of Positive Leadership on the Intrinsic and Extrinsic Motivators of Entry-Level Firefighters, which is a big way of saying basically how do we motivate our firefighters, internally and externally, right? And that's what we're looking for as leaders. We're looking to motivate people. We're looking to create followers who are willing to listen to what we have to say and listen to our for lack of better terms, commands or direction or our guidance, or whatever you want to say for that. So, background of the problem itself. This study is a single case study, which means that the idea behind it is that it is a singular organization that was being studied. There's multiple people from within the organization, but it's a singular organization. So, for example, this one specifically is on Brevard County Fire Rescue. And I utilize Brevard County Fire Rescue for two main reasons. One, they have an extremely high turnover rate, and that in itself is going to lead to the problem existing and looking for a way to fix the problem. Second, up until about 6 months ago, I worked for the organization. So I had an intimate knowledge of everything that occurs in the organization, the leadership, and everything like that, as well as some of the problems that are presented. And there was a direct desire to improve the leadership within the organization. There still is, because the fact of the matter is, I live within the county currently, and I want the best firefighters and paramedics to be responding to my call if I should call 911, whether it be for a fire or medical emergency. So there's definitely some skin in the game when it comes to this research study. Um, the background of the problem itself is adequate staffing of emergency services. So, like I said, we're talking about the desire to reduce turnover intent through motivating of firefighters and meeting those intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. So, as we all know, I think we can all go on social media, we can go on the news, and we can see over and over again all these different departments and these different unions talking about how we are lacking enough people to do the job. And that is starting to create unsafe working environments, as well as really negative outcomes of patients and of emergency calls. One of the things that kind of led to this is we look at the staffing crisis that's occurring basically based on scheduling. So the traditional firefighter schedule within Florida, anyway, up until about 15 years ago, was a 24 on, 48-hour off schedule, which is 56-hour work week. About 15 years ago, that standard started to change, and we started to move into a what's called a 48-hour work week, which is 24 hours on, 48 hours off, and then every shift there is a 24-hour off Kelly day, scheduled Kelly day. This helps with recovery of our firefighters. This helps bridge that gap of work-life balance and increases the morale. At least that's the idea of it, to increase the morale of the firefighters by giving them more time off, right? Now we're moving into another shift in scheduling, which is the 42-hour work week, which is 24 hours on, 72 hours off. But by implementing this, it requires us to hire an additional entire shift. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about expanding a department's staffing by 25 to 30% right off the bat in order to meet these needs. Now, this is expanding that specifically for the calls that are already occurring. This is an expansion of it by adding another station or additional units or additional services. This is simply to continue remaining status quo. We're expanding the size of our staffing to remain status quo. And this is a good thing. This provides our firefighters more time off. It provides them more recovery. In fact, I just read a study the other day that actually shows that sleeping patterns and the ability for the body to recover as far as cognitive reaction times and everything is almost ideal at the 24/72 schedule. However, in Florida, we don't have enough firefighters to meet this schedule, which means that as these departments do that, the departments that are paying less or have a less than ideal schedule will continue to lose people to those organizations. Now, one way we can help that out as organizations are slowly adopting these schedules is by creating an environment that is conducive of growth for the firefighter and creating an environment that they actually want to come to work and they want to be there. So that's kind of the background of the problem that's occurring and why we started digging into this specific study. So the research questions that I came out with, actually, before I do the research questions, let's talk about the problem statement itself. So the specific problem statement that I utilized for this research study was to address the challenges that leaders face in the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation of firefighters within Brevard County, Florida, possibly resulting in a decreased morale and increased turnover. So, like I said, as a single case study, we have to stick to a specific organization, in which case this was Brevard County, Florida. Now, even though this is a single case study, I'm not saying that this is not able to be generalized to other organizations. I firmly believe that there's places in Texas, Virginia, California, Washington, even the Northeast, wherever it may be, that can utilize this information, this data to create and benefit them in their ability to lead firefighters and meet those motivations. So I want to start with that even though this is a single case study and it's not meant to generalize out to other organizations, there's still a lot of good information that can be obtained from this to use in your own organization. The research questions that we utilized for this study, and like I said, I'm going to dig into this study. We're going to go through all of this, the background of it, the reason why, how things were selected, and all of that, because every single aspect of that leads up to what the findings were and why those findings are what they are. So there's a lot of information to digest here. So I apologize if certain times it seems a little slow, but I promise you there's a reason for all of it. So the research questions that we utilized within the study is the primary one was how can the problem of motivating firefighters by their leadership be improved? That's the real gist of this is how can we improve motivating firefighters by their leadership? The sub question off of that is how does leadership style influence firefighter morale and motivation? And the second sub question is to what extent does morale of a firefighter impact the turnover of the organization? And like I said, the research questions and the sub questions are basically like our vision statement when we talk about an organization. We look back on that. We look back at the mission over and over and over again to say, okay, how is this study relating back to those questions? Is it relating back to those questions? And if it's not, how did we get off task? So it's important that we know those research questions as we start looking into the actual study itself. So let's dig into the design of the study now. So there's three basic designs to a research study. You have either the flexible research study, which is a qualitative study, which is exactly what this one is. Which is ideal for social behavioral studies. Basically, when we look at a flexible design study, we're looking at uh, something that you can't observe necessarily. We're looking into the ideas, the thoughts, the opinions of a person and how that impacts their behavior and why they act a certain way rather than the actual action that they're acting. So I can observe an action, right? And that goes and falls into our fixed design, which is a quantitative study. Quantitative is actual things that you can observe. Flexible or qualitative are things that we have to kind of interpret based on someone's thoughts, someone's feelings, someone's emotions, someone's behavior, someone's opinions, right? And then the final type of study is the mixed design, which is a mix of flexible and fixed design. And like I said, fixed design is our quantitative study, is things that are observed. So mixed design is not only things that are observed, but also the reasoning behind those things that are being observed. This one, we stuck to a flexible design, which is a qualitative study, because it is a social behavioral study. I am studying the behaviors of firefighters, not necessarily the fact that they're leaving. I can look at the numbers and say, okay, X amount of people left last year. Prior to that, X amount of people left. That shows that there's a 30% increase in turnover. That's great. That's quantitative values. But I want to know why they're leaving, why that behavior is occurring. So that's why this was selected. Like I said before, this is a single case study focusing on Brevard County Fire Rescue. The idea behind single case study is that each person is actively engaged in the phenomena that's occurring, meaning that if I were to do it over multiple organizations, those multiple organizations may have different uh, things occurring that could impact their behavior, impact their opinions and their ideas. So this means that the singular case of Brevard County Fire Rescue, everything that's occurring with that organization, each person has direct impact from. Finally, we use triangulation. Triangulation kind of creates some validity and reliability to the study itself. For this study, we used methodological triangulation, which means basically we're using different methods to obtain information. Primarily in this one, we're using the interviews and focus groups. So interviews kind of give us an idea of what the individual is thinking. It's a one-on-one interview. It's me talking to someone and asking questions and then giving me feedback, right? Now, the information that I obtain from them is usually pretty accurate information. It's good information because it's one-on-one. There's not necessarily an idea of what's this other person thinking kind of deal. Now we go into the focus groups, and that allows me to have multiple people within that group. And now we start to develop group think. We start to develop ideas and topics that are what they think others want to hear and what they think the group wants to hear. And that kind of changes things a little bit. So this allows us to have two different methods of obtaining data to see how they align and to see kind of what we discover with that. Additionally, through methodological triangulation, we investigate not only the one side of the incident occurring, but both sides. So when we're talking about motivating our firefighters, there's two sides of that. There's the firefighter being motivated, and then there's the leader that is doing the motivating. So by interviewing both parties, the employee or the firefighter, and the leadership, which is the fire officer or the crew officer, which for this one is our lieutenant. That's the position. That's the direct supervisor of firefighters at Brevard. But by interviewing both of them, now we get kind of, for lack of better terms, both sides of the story, which is important. We need to have that. We need to have both sides providing their information. So moving forward, we move into concepts, and the concepts are kind of things that we see and things that we research through literature and through previous studies and everything that align with what we believe is occurring within this organization, within this research study, and the way it relates to that research study. And I'm gonna tell you guys right now, I'm gonna go over a lot of things, and you guys are gonna probably go, "This is common sense. This is duh. This is a duh moment, right?" And the reasoning behind that, it's good that it's a duh moment. That means that previous research has kind of created a concept in our mind that this is how things should be. We've seen that this is what this research shows, and now it's become not necessarily law, but it's become common knowledge, and that's good. But we need to still express it, and we need to still look into it, and we need to still provide the reasonings and how we got to that in the first place. So the first concept is fulfillment of expectations leads to job satisfaction. Again, guys, duh. If we have expectations when we get on the job and those expectations are met, we're going to be happy with that job, right? We walked into a job and said, "I expect X, Y, and Z. I got X, Y, and Z. I'm happy. That's exactly what I was looking for." Conversely, if I go into a job and I say I'm expecting X, Y, and Z, this is what was promised, and then I get something completely different or a much, much lower outcome than I was expecting, then I'm not going to be satisfied. And that's going to lead to a decrease in job satisfaction, which leads us to the next concept. Job satisfaction reduces employee turnover. Again, this is another duh statement. If I'm happy at my job, then why would I leave? Right? So the job satisfaction when I'm happy there is going to reduce employee turnover and employee turnover intent. And that's something that's important that we're going to dig into a little bit later in this review or this presentation of the research is turnover intent versus turnover, right? So job satisfaction reduces employee turnover, duh. And the third concept we look at is employees are attracted to organizations that fit their interest. And this is kind of a duh, right? We can say that, okay, if I'm interested, most of us are interested in money, right? We were looking at getting paid for our services. That's why we are there. We're there to put food on the table. We're not doing this as a volunteer. We're not doing this as, the goodness of our heart. We're doing this as a job to make money. And that's across the board for your work, right? Now, with that being said, if I were to say, "Hey, I'm going to pay you, $200,000 a year, but you have to be at work 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, and it's backbreaking labor, and you're only able to get 3 hours of sleep," does that meet your interest? And the answer is most likely no, unless you're, completely out of your mind. But if you focus on only that singular interest of money, then that meets that. So we have to find where all of the interests are and make sure that we're meeting all of those interests to attract those employees, which could be things like work-life balance. It could be things like pay. It could be things like the quality of the equipment, the environment that you're working in, the ability to grow within the organization, special teams like dive rescue, tech rescue, things like that. Those are all specific things that we need to be aware of. That if those interests are there, if somebody's interested to that, they're going to be attracted to that organization that has that. The next section that we start talking about is the theories that are utilized within the study. So we have theories, and these are theories that are not necessarily, I hate to say the word proven because obviously theory is theoretical, but these are tried and true theories that have been researched a lot in the past and have a lot of merit to them. And we utilize these to try to explain the motivations behind the respondents' answers. They're giving me their behaviors, they're giving me the reason why. This kind of gives us the why behind the why, if that makes sense. So the two theories that we utilize for this research study is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you guys may be aware, I did an entire podcast on Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how it impacts the firefighters. And that was based on this research study. However, like I said, I only wanted to present small portions of it in the past because I was waiting to receive final sign off of the study in order to make sure that everything was there and nothing was going to have to change or be edited or could cause any issues with the degree being conferred or anything like that. So I wanted everything signed off, accepted, and presented prior to giving out any of this information. So, or the complex or the complete information. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs kind of describes basically what people are looking for, what the needs of the people are that we have to meet in order to meet satisfaction of the person. So when we look at it from a standpoint of a firefighter or even anybody in the job and work sector, there's five levels of it of Maslow's hierarchy, right? And like I said, we're going to breeze through this real quick because I did an entire podcast on it. I've actually been a guest on multiple podcasts now talking about it. I really, really love this. And I think that Maslow's hierarchy is absolutely critical for describing how to motivate people and creating a motivational strategy for leadership in every single industry, whether it's fire department, public safety, business sector, any industry at all. But anyway, I digress. Back to the Maslow's hierarchy. So there's five levels that we utilize in that. The first one is the physiological or survival needs, which talks about air, food, water, shelter, things like that. We basically relate that back to the workforce or the fire department as compensation, right? I need to make a certain amount of money in order to put a roof over my head and to put food on the table to support my family. That's number one. If that's not met, then nothing else matters on the hierarchy of needs because I have to have that to survive. Move up to the next one, which is safety needs. And by the way, all of these, they're a pyramid because of the fact that they all lay on top of each other. I have to meet level one in order to move it to level two, in order to move to level three, et cetera, et cetera. If for some reason I'm at level four and all of a sudden my survival needs collapse, I don't go back one level. I go all the way back down to the very beginning because that's the most important thing that needs to occur. So, level two was safety needs. Talking about security, talking about health. We're talking about things like that. I also put sleep into safety needs, and I think that's important to talk about real quick because I've had multiple discussions and quasi debates on this. Is that sleep should be under physiological. And technically, typically, sleep is under physiological needs because you need it to survive and to live. However, when we're reviewing this from the standpoint of the fire department, we're never going to get to the point where the fire department prevents you from having enough sleep to live, to survive, right? You're still going to have days off. You're still going to have days to recover. So when I put it in there, I put it under safety needs because I'm looking at it from the aspect of a lack of sleep because a unit's running too many calls or a person's working too much overtime is going to not necessarily impact their survival in their life, but it's going to impact their ability to make good decisions and to react quickly in situations that need quick reaction times, leading to those decreases in health and safety, right? So the third level is our love and belonging level. And this is talking about fitting in, basically, camaraderie within your crew and being accepted by a crew. You're belonging with a crew. So that's what we look at for firefighting is you're accepted in your crew. You're one of the team. That's that level three. Level four is our esteem, where we're talking about self-esteem. We're talking about respect. We're talking about status. And those things are built usually over time. With that team, right? So once you've been on a team long enough and you've kind of proven yourself, then you've met that fourth level of esteem. And then the fifth level, the final level, is self-actualization, which is the desire to become the most that you can be. This is that point where you're now seeking to be the best that you can. A lot of times that's that point where you say, okay, I'm ready to promote. I'm ready to take on a leadership role. I'm ready to go to the next level. And one important thing that I was talking about recently on a podcast is that once you hit that level, you don't stay at that level. There's kind of a wave periodization kind of aspect to this. And I say wave periodization just because I'm also a powerlifting coach, so it goes back to that mentality. But the wave that you see is you go up, you hit that fifth level, and then you promote. And what happens when you promote? You go back down to about a level three, right? So now you're looking at your love and belonging. You're looking at fitting in with your crew again and building up that belonging sense of belonging within that crew, your new crew. Then you get up to the esteem level. You've built the respect as whatever your new rank is. Then you get to the self-actualization level where you say, okay, I'm ready to take on the next move. And you try to move up again. And you keep on doing this wave as you go up the ranks or up the ladder of not necessarily success or promotion, but also the ladder of just, self-actualization, the ladder of actually being better as that person, whatever that may look like, whether it's getting a class, whether it's getting a degree, whether it's a promotion, whether it's taking on a leadership role, whatever it may be. So the next theory that we utilized was social exchange theory. And social exchange theory is basically, for lack of better terms, it's basically like a transactional theory, a transactional relationship. So when I say social exchange theory, think about it like this. If I go to a restaurant and I say that you have a hamburger, I want that hamburger. I want to eat that hamburger. What do I have to do to get that? Well, I have to give them money. So I present money because I want the hamburger, and McDonald's or whoever says, well, here's the hamburger because I want money. So I'm meeting their needs by providing money. They're meeting my needs by providing the hamburger. Everybody's happy. We've engaged in a transaction. Social exchange theory is just that. I go to a person and I say, in order to establish a relationship with you, I have X, Y, and Z to provide to the relationship. That person says either X, Y, and Z is what I'm looking for, or they say, I don't want that, I'm out. Now, in exchange for that, they will provide certain things. And once both sides are met, what I'm providing is substantial for them, what they're providing is substantial for me. Now we engage in a relationship. And that's what social exchange theory is basically two parties engaging in a relationship because they're exchanging what the other person wants. So in the fire department, it may be I want an organization that's going to pay me X. They're going to give me the ability to promote, and they're going to provide me an environment where I am happy and I'm accepted. If those three things are there, then I will provide them the skills and the services that I have as a firefighter, EMT, or a firefighter paramedic. And that's where that exchange occurs. And now we've entered into a relationship. Um, What's really important, though, is that social exchange theory actually kind of ties together with Maslow's hierarchy of needs because the needs typically are the employees' aspect of what they're looking for from the social exchange. And then what they can provide is the skills and services. So they kind of tie together pretty well. But the main theory that was utilized for this one was Maslow's hierarchy of needs because we're really looking for those motivational aspects of it, both intrinsic and extrinsic. The respondents. The respondents for the study were firefighters and lieutenants. And when I say that, we kind of have a level of assumption that occurs when we create who our respondents are going to be. And the assumption is basically a firefighter is assumed to have firefighter one, firefighter two, and EMT as a base. Some of them have paramedics, some have hazmat, some have tech rescue classes, drivers classes, all kinds of things, right? But the base minimum was assumed to have that because that makes them employable and eligible to work at a fire department in the state of Florida. Now, on the officer side, the lieutenant side, it is assumed that all the lieutenants have fire officer one, they have a specific amount of time on the job, and those are the two things that are commonly required throughout the state to have that position. In Brevard, that's the case as well. So that creates our two levels of respondents. You have our employee level, and then you have our leadership level. And basically, we've now surrounded the phenomena or the incident or the situation that occurs when it comes to leading and motivating a firefighter. As we move into the constructs of this now, and like I said, these are all basic things that have to occur. We have to look at in order to create what this study is, what this research is, and what it's all about. And all of it ties into our findings so that when we look at the findings and we say, okay, this occurred, this occurred, this occurred, we looked at this, this, and this, that provides that validity and reliability of the study to say that these findings are actually legitimate, if that makes sense. So our constructs that we're looking at here, and there's three constructs that we selected, which kind of makes sense because it relates again back to our research questions as well as the study itself. The first construct that we looked at was intrinsic motivation. So what is intrinsic motivation? Sorry, my mouth's getting dry here. Intrinsic motivation is basically internal motivation, things that are going to internally motivate me to do something. So we see a lot of times intrinsic motivation, especially for a firefighter, is to, help people. That's a big one. We see it every single interview that I've ever done for a firefighter. Why do you want to be a fireman? "Oh, I like to help people." Okay, tell me more. Um, Other intrinsic motivations are things like being on a team. I want to be a team player. I want to make a difference in lives. I want to, uh, grow mentally as well as physically as well as emotionally, things like that. Extrinsic motivation are external motivators. So things like schedule, things like pay and compensation. Those are our extrinsic things that motivate us to do something. And then finally, positive leadership. And positive leadership is a construct that basically says that it is a leadership style that's going to lead to a positive outcome, right? So a negative leadership style is going to push people away from wanting to follow that person, while a positive leadership style is going to want to attract them to follow that person. And that's not to say that when I talk about positive leadership versus negative leadership, that the intent or the what they're leading someone to is positive or negative. So, for example, if you look at someone like a dictator that has a strong following would still utilize a positive leadership because they're attracting people to follow them in a positive manner. In fact, when I say positive manner, I mean they're positively attracting them, right? Now, whereas you could have someone who, say, is a pastor or something like that, who has the best intentions on earth, but utilizes negative leadership styles, even though the intent is good, the outcome that they're looking for is a good outcome. It's a negative style because they're pushing the people away from following them, right? So that's the positive versus negative leadership as far as the construct goes there. So the next section that we go into, and by the way, this is, like I said, this is a ton of information that I'm throwing at you guys, and I'm trying to get it as relatively short as possible. The entire study itself is going to be available on the website unbrandedleadership.com. So please feel free to download it, to read it, to utilize it in any way you can to make a positive difference on your organization or on your department or on just yourself as a leader. Really, the whole intent behind it is to leave the fire service better than we found it, right? So take it, use it, whatever you need from it. I just ask that you provide credit if you do use it for something, as far as writing something up, posting, using it as a reference, whatever. So back to the study here. The next portion of the study is our review of previous literature. And the review of previous literature is a long, long section because we have to develop not only literary trends, but we also have to develop what's been studied in the past, how it impacts this study, and basically start creating and finding those gaps within the research and say, okay, yes, you looked into the X, Y, and Z, but I need right in between that. Well, there's something there that I'm looking for that's not explained. Because if it's already been explained, if it's already been researched, I can just do a literary research study, and then there's really no need for this actual entire research project, right? But the purpose of this is to find those gaps and fill those gaps of information. So that's what the literary aspect of it, the literature, the review of literature is. A couple of things that were found during the review of literature, and like I said, there's a substantial amount of it. But some of the big things that I wanted to touch on was the effect of leadership on morale. Again, like I said, just like when we talked about the concepts, there's a lot of things in here that are duh moments. You look at it, you go, duh, that makes sense. But the reason why it's duh and makes sense is because somebody researched it, somebody created it, somebody looked into it, and that research explained what was occurring, the phenomena that was occurring, and the outcomes and the causation of that. That's what creates that duh moment because now we all have accepted it because of someone else's research, right? So that's why we have to explain the duh moment to prove that it is actually factual and not just someone's opinion or someone's idea or someone's emotions getting in the way. So the first one was effect of leadership on morale. And we see throughout the literature that morale is directly impacted by leadership. There's a saying out there that says that people don't quit bad organizations; they quit bad leaders, right? And there's a lot of truth to that to be found in within the literature and the research that's out there. Um, when people are led in a negative way, like I said before, they're pushed away, right? A negative leader is someone who pushes people away and doesn't necessarily create a desire to follow them. The problem we see in an organization, especially a rank and file type of organization that has an organizational chart or a hierarchy, is that people that are put into positions of leadership are not necessarily uh, good leaders. They're put in a position where they oversee a certain amount of people, typical of a military or paramilitary organization. They're put in that position, yet that doesn't make them a good leader. So when you are put in that position of authority and you're put in the position of actual leadership, as far as your authoritative aspect of that, if you're a negative leader, they have no choice but to still work for you. That leads to, well, I guess they do have a choice, right? That leads to them going, you know what? My morale sucks here. I don't want to be here anymore. How can I get out? And that may be as simple as I'm going to bid out and go to another station and work for another leader, or maybe they just leave the organization completely and they go off and work for another department or another job or industry completely. So there is a direct effect on that and direct impact. The other aspect of that is those positive leaders attract people to them. So all of a sudden, you have someone that's put into that position, that authoritative position, that now has those positive leadership characteristics. And now people are trying to come work for them. Now there's a bunch of people that are fighting each other to work for that person. So even though there may be other aspects of the job that are not necessarily as good, that leader is pulling people to them. So let's look at it from an example here. And again, this goes back to supported completely by the literature. Let's look at the example of a busy station. You have a station that's running 20 calls a day. They're up all night every night, but they have a really good positive leader running that station. People still want to work there. I can literally picture in my mind stations that have that, stations that are busy, they get their butt kicked, they're running nonstop. They may have a crappy station that they're in that's a trailer station. The equipment they have is old and beat up, but people are loving it. People want to be there specifically because of the crew and because of the person that's leading them, right? And we'll see this a little bit more in the findings of this research study, but I just wanted to put that out there to start with, that the literature does support that. So that leads to the next one of what is a positive leadership style. So when we started looking at the research and the literature that existed out there, we saw that there was three main leadership styles that kept on popping up. And again, this isn't to say this is a conclusive literary research study that there's only three or that the most popular are these three. It's just these three kept on coming up and that it felt like it was needed to be noted within here, especially when we were researching based on public safety and public servants. So the three leadership styles that were constantly coming up was servant leadership, charismatic leadership, and transformational leadership. So servant leadership is one in which the leader is there to serve their people, right? It's a very empowering leadership style. It's basically, what can I do for you to be successful, rather than what can you do for me to be successful. So great leadership style. One that I have written a lot about, and I am a true believer of it. And I strive to be a servant leader myself. I think it's a fantastic style, and the literature supports that. Charismatic leadership style is another positive leadership style. So a charismatic leader is one that possesses that charisma. They're very likable. People want and are attracted to be around them, right? Now, again, going back to what we talked about with the negative and positive leadership styles, just because it's a positive leadership style does not mean the intent of what they're looking to do is positive, right? That in itself is very subjective. So, for example, one charismatic leader that everybody knows of is Hitler. Hitler was a charismatic leader. He had charisma and he attracted people to him. That's how he moved into that dictatorship role, because he was charismatic. Now, obviously, what he was looking to do with that leadership was not something considered positive by any means. It was extremely negative. It was extremely violent and terrible. But the leadership style he utilized was positive in that the actual leadership style attracted people to him because of his charisma. And the final leadership one that kept on popping up was transformational. And transformational is similar to servant leadership in that you were there to empower others. I'm not here to have a transactional leadership where I say do this and you do this for me because I'm paying you or because of whatever else. Instead, it's transformational. I'm looking to transform you. I'm looking to empower you. I'm looking for you to grow to the next level. I want to take you from the level 3 or level 4 of Maslow's hierarchy and get you to level 5. My goal is for you to grow, for you to transform, and for you to be better. And that's a strong, strong leadership style, especially for someone who's into coaching or mentoring. That's the kind of leadership style you're looking for because you're looking to transform the person that you're coaching or mentoring. So those are the three main ones that popped up during the literature review. Another one that popped up, or another portion of literature, the literary review was turnover, and specifically turnover intent versus turnover itself. And I told you we were going to talk a little bit about that, and this is where we are here. So turnover itself is an observable phenomenon, right? It's objective. I can look at it and say, this organization lost 10 people last year. This organization lost 20 people this year. That's an increase of 10 people over the year. All completely observable, right? Now, what it doesn't explain necessarily is where everyone else in the organization is within their mindset, their behavior, and their morale. Turnover intent looks at that aspect. So we could say that, okay, for example, Brevard County lost just over 100 people in the last calendar year, which is about 20% of the entire department. Actually, a little bit more than that, like 22% of the entire department left within 1 year. Substantial, bad things for sure. But now let's look at the other, 78% that are still there. Are they ride or die? Are they stuck there? Are they feeling like they're going to be there forever? Or do they already have turnover intent in their mind? Do they already have applications out? Are they looking at other organizations? Are they looking to get out themselves? Because when you start factoring in turnover intent or the desire to leave an organization, now all of a sudden that 22% that actually left becomes like 70, 80% of the people that have turnover intent. So here's how that starts to react or relate within this literature and literary review is that those people that already have turnover intent in their mind are now already looking at doing the bare minimum. They're looking at getting out. They're looking at investing their time, their resources, and their dedication to other organizations rather than the organization they work for. Going back to that conversation that we had, I don't even know, a couple months ago about organizational citizenship behavior. The people who have a high turnover intent do not exhibit organizational citizenship behavior because they don't feel like they're citizens of that organization. They feel like they're an outsider looking to leave. And that's what the literature supports here, right? So that's another factor, another portion of this that's important to understand before we even move into the creation of our interview questions and the interview guide and how we're going to, start pulling that data out of those firefighters specific to this single case study. Another one was the challenges of motivating firefighters. So there are some key challenges for motivating firefighters that are very, very much isolated to the fire rescue industry, and not necessarily just the fire rescue industry, but something that is common throughout. First one was burnout. It talks about the fact that burnout and just overworking of our firefighters is common throughout the industry. It's not just locally within this organization. That's one thing that's really important too. Like I said, when we look at the literary review, is that our literary reviews are throughout everywhere, not just even this country. A lot of the literature that I was reviewing was from Europe, from China and Japan. So we have a lot of information from all over the globe about what we're looking at and the specific behaviors that we're looking at for this individual study, even though the study is only located to Brevard County Fire Rescue. But like I said, burnout was one big one. There's a lot of information, a lot of literature out there that says that burnout is a key factor in morale. It's a key factor in job satisfaction, and it's a key factor in turnover intent. That when they're burned out, the more that they're doing during the time that they're there, or the more time that they're forced or required to be there, can be impactful on that morale. And this is again across the board. Another one was intrinsic expectations not being met. And when I say intrinsic expectations not being met, like I talked about before, intrinsic means things like, why are you doing this? Well, I want to help people. Okay. Well, the firefighter gets hired on and says, I'm doing this because I want to help people, goes to a busy station and realizes that 90% of their calls are on people who shouldn't be calling 911 in the first place. There are people who are abusing the system. There are people who are being transported to the hospital because they want a chicken sandwich. True story. I actually had that patient. But this is what they're realizing is that the fire service wasn't necessarily what they expected it to be. They thought they were going to go in there and help people that really truly needed help. And it ended up being that they got the wool pulled over their eyes and they're running calls on people who don't need help, shouldn't be calling 911 in the first place, aren't having an emergency and abusing the system. Or they thought that the fire department was going to be something based on what they saw on TV. And this is another one that was in the literature a pretty decent amount, which is kind of exciting to see that people were looking into this. But you see a lot of what social media shows, and you see a lot of what the actual mainstream media shows as far as, you turn on the news. What are the news reporting on? They're reporting on, oh, this department ran this fire. This person saved this person from a crane collapse. They had this water rescue. And the person who doesn't know any better looks at that and goes, wow, look at all those things that I get to do. I get to go out there and be, the hero and pull these people in and hang from ropes and all this other stuff. Well, they don't realize that, yeah, those three incidents that occurred in one day occurred throughout the entire state of Florida. They're not going to be dealing with this every single day. That's a once in a lifetime call for those people that were involved in it. So their expectations don't get met because of that. Or they watch a TV show and they see that, oh, on the TV show, all they do is fight fire. There's no BS calls. They're nonstop. All they're doing is running fires. This is great. This is what I want to do. It's so exciting. It's so thrilling and, whatever have you. And then they get on the job and go, man, it's been 8 months and I haven't had a really good fire. Like, why am I doing this? So those expectations not being met is another key factor that impacts morale and impacts the job satisfaction. And finally, competition was another one that was popped up a lot. And not necessarily as a bad thing, not necessarily to say competition is bad, but more of the lack of competition was bad. A lot of the people that are getting into the fire service, and again, the literature supports this, have a mentality of being the best. They have a mentality of competition. Many of them got into the fire service because they were team players and they played in team sports to begin with. So when they got onto the job, they wanted that thrill of competing. They wanted to be the best. And when they got into the job and realized that a lot of their crew members and a lot of the people that they were working with did not feel the same way and did not feel to strive to be the best, that led to a decrease in morale and a decrease in job satisfaction. So it was almost the fact of working with people who were not necessarily lazy, but more of the bare minimum type of mentality. And unfortunately, we have that throughout our entire society. Not every single person carries that. We still have people that want to be the best, but the overlying amount of people I would say is looking to do just enough to get by versus being the best and putting everything they can into it. And when you have that person that's working with a crew that was bare minimum crew, immediately their morale tanks and they look to go elsewhere. They look to increase that turnover intent, right? So that was a lot of the things that were noted, a lot of the trends that were noted through the literary review. Next one is our limitations of the study. And again, this is included in a research study to basically provide an idea of opening up bias and showing what limitations may be there within the study so that people don't get the wrong idea and think, oh, this is a bulletproof research study, because there's no such thing as a bulletproof research study. There's always going to be some level of bias that occurs in which the researcher themselves should find it and should try to eliminate that bias. However, we're all human. Anybody who says that they've eliminated all biases completely is a liar. I'm telling you that right now. Additionally, with the limitations of the study is things that occur naturally within the study, especially within a single case study, because of the limitation of the size and the fact that you're holding true to a specific singular organization. So, limitations of this study, diversity of respondents. This is something that I wanted to really try hard to increase was the diversity of respondents. However, the respondents based on the organization is what it is. The organization, when it comes to the fire service, is primarily white males. That is our primary target within the fire service. And we can look back on that and say, okay, a lot of that comes back to the fact that when the fire service began, a couple hundred years ago, when it was actually starting to grow and everything like that, the people who were primarily taking the fire department jobs were Irish and Italian. And that's because they were considered the lowest level jobs, and those were the lowest level people, lowest level immigrants that were coming over. So there's a strong history of Irish and Italian firefighters within the fire service. With that being said, we did not have the diversity numbers that I wanted within the study, but that's okay because the study is based on Brevard County Fire Rescue. So that matched that organization. I will say that was happy that we had a higher level of female participation than I initially thought we would. So I was very pleased with that. But from a standpoint of ethnic or cultural, it was limited for sure. Another one is the sample size of a single case study. And again, this is something that we can't control. This is when you select an organization for a single case study and you select that single case, your sample size is what it is. If I had selected, I mean, Brevard County Fire Rescue, we're looking at just under 500 personnel within there. That's field personnel. Of that, I think we're looking at 350 or so, yeah, 350 or so firefighters and about 115 lieutenants. So I'm looking at a population group or a sample size group of 465-ish people, right? So that limits the amount of people that I can reach out to, and that limits the amount of people who are going to respond to the study and be a willing participant. Um, if I had used a smaller department, there's a good chance that you're looking at a department of 30 to 50 people. You may only have 5 to 10 responses total because that's all that's interested in doing that. And that's one of the big things with a qualitative study is that it has to be willingly. I can't force someone to do this because right off the bat, my information is now skewed because I forced them to do it. They're gonna say whatever they think I want them to say, or they're gonna say things out of spite because of the fact that they're being forced to do a study. So there's another aspect with that. The final limitation of that is gatekeepers. So gatekeepers are basically people who are in charge of others that are, for lack of better terms, they're the ones that are allowing the researcher through the gate. Okay. So when I told you about selecting Brevard County Fire Rescue, I said that I did it for two reasons. One was high turnover intent. The other one was because I used to work there. And with that being said, the gatekeeper aspect of it was very, very minimal. Fire chief was more than happy, signed off on it, was a proponent of this because, again, the intent of it was to make the department better. The intent of it is to make the fire service better and to increase leadership. And that was fantastic. And I'm glad that I had that support with it. The union was another aspect, was very, very pro into this and really wanted to see this information. And what they wanted to utilize it for is up to them. I have no idea the specifics of it, whether they wanted to use it for negotiations, they wanted to use it because the reality is the union members and the union leadership are also leaders themselves. So maybe they were looking to improve their leadership style. I don't know, but they were for it as well. What happened was, as I started to reach out to individual people and they would come back and say, "Hey, I'm interested in being a participant." I had a few of them that actually told me when I let them know that, yes, I'm going to record it on Zoom, but only so that I can transcribe it for the study itself for qualitative coding and everything like that. When they learned that it was being recorded, I had multiple people tell me they didn't want any part of it anymore. And I said, no, 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 it's anonymous. Nobody's going to know who you are. I'm not recording any names. All I'm recording is your age, your gender, and what you say. And like I said, I'm transcribing it just for that. There will be nothing that's released that shows you are doing this. And multiple ones said, nope, we feel like we're going to be retaliated against from leadership. And I was like, oh, man, that's unfortunate. So that was a gatekeeper that I really wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting people to pull out of the research study because of fear of being retaliated against. And it's unfortunate that that occurred, but we still had a significant amount of numbers that I was able to achieve data saturation and be solid with the results and the coding and everything. So let's move on to the next section of the study itself, which is the research. So again, when I describe the research, I'm describing what I'm looking to do with the research and how I'm looking to utilize the research to provide those findings, to provide that improvement, those suggestions moving forward. So the first aspect we have to go over is the role of the researcher. So what was the role of myself as the researcher? And that's simple enough. It's to obtain the data and to interpret and code that data, right? This goes back to the bias aspect of it. It's not my job to lead someone into answering a certain way or to guide them into a certain conversation. So when I created the interview guides, the purpose of that was basically to hit those questions that I was looking for in a very open-ended approach. And some of them, I'll tell you right now, some of the responses I got were extremely short responses. How's the morale of the department? Oh, it's terrible. Okay, do you want to expand on that? No, not really. Okay, fair enough. That's what we got. Other ones, I almost had to shut them down. An hour and a half into a conversation, I'm going, bro, I don't know the amount of information you're giving me in the sidebar conversation that's happening from this is absolutely insane at this point. So there was that aspect of guiding them when it comes to obtaining data. But again, I'm not guiding them for a specific reason or to skew the data in any way. This was simply open-ended questions and allowing people to just word vomit, for lack of better terms, just to put it out there, get everything out of what they feel, what they were thinking, and why they were behaving the way they were. The other aspect of the researcher is interpreting and coding data. And this is a very difficult one because this is where you start seeing biases really come in. You can have bias in the questioning and the leading of the respondent, but it's more apparent in the interpretation of the data when you look into it. And this is again one of those factors of I looked into the questions from a completely unbiased standpoint, at least I tried to, of I'm looking for this to improve leadership. I'm looking for this to improve the fire service. No other reason. I didn't have any ill intent in mind. I wasn't looking to skew the answers. To be honest with you, I thought when it comes to positive leadership styles, I thought for sure servant leadership was going to be mentioned more than anything else. And as we get into the findings section in a minute, you're going to see that it actually wasn't. And it was kind of shocking to me. So again, the idea wasn't to confirm what my own thoughts were on the process. It was to basically establish what everyone else's thoughts were. And that's how I looked into it. Was when I interpreted it, I read it individually and said, okay, highlight this explains this, and code. So when we coded the data, that's where our themes come from, right? It creates a thematic coding where it says, okay, this person mentioned this many times. This is something that was established here. It gives us an idea of what the majority of people were thinking and the route that they were thinking and why they were thinking it. And that's how we look at that when we code it. Participants, we already talked about this a little bit. We had 21 firefighters and 17 fire officers out of a population of about 350 firefighters and 115 lieutenants. So really great participant numbers. 38 respondents is almost unheard of in a study like this. And yeah, I'm so glad that we had that number because we did hit data saturation kind of early, and we were able to see a lot of themes emerging very early on. But the additional people kind of helped to reinforce that. And there was a couple of things that kind of popped up, and I was like, oh man, that I'm glad that that person, because even though these themes developed, there's a couple of other aspects that I didn't think about that we could have, plugged in there that actually led to future studies or ideas for future studies. Like I said before, data collection was through interviews and focus groups. And I think this is very important because the interviews, the one-on-one interviews, gave me a great idea of what the individual person thought. The focus group gave me a great idea of what the entirety of the group of people thought. So not just the individual, but the group. And what we saw with the focus groups is that I utilized sometimes it was an entire crew, other times it was separate people from different crews together. But they were all people who had been engaged in the interview. So I had already interviewed every single person that was there. And then the focus groups were from those same pool of interview people. So you could see it and say, well, it's not just, okay, well, the focus group just picked people that were thinking this mindset and the interviews were thinking this mindset. No, they were the same people, just in different environment when they were responding. So. Data coding was done through a program called NVivo. It's a really, really easy to use program that you basically transcribe everything, you put it in there, and then you can go through and say, okay, question by question, person by person. I can link up and say, this is, the demographics of every single person that was interviewed, the different ranks, and then I could go through the coding and figure out how many times something was mentioned, or I could put a construct in there and say, okay, this is discussing servant leadership, this is discussing leading by example, even if those terms weren't utilized. The idea behind it was aligned with that, so I could code it that way. And then that's how themes were discovered. From there, I was able to go through and say, okay, based on the amount of times this was accumulated there, or times that this was mentioned or talked about, I'm able to create those themes to see that stuff, right? Um, and finally, under the research was ethical assurances, and this is another important aspect of every research study, especially if you have to go through NRB approval or IRB approval rather. So the ethical assurances that was there is every single person was uh, given information to make sure that they were completely uh, aware and informed and provided an informed consent. So everyone was known that it was anonymous, and it was anonymous in the aspect of what I was recording. Like I said, I worked for the organization. So every single person that I interviewed, I knew them. They knew me. Uh, One thing that I think is important to realize is that when I did the research, I was no longer working for the organization. So when I started to reach out to these people, I think personally, this is an opinion. I think that there was a lot less of an ability for them to think, oh, he might use it against me, kind of deal. Going back to the people who were afraid to be or people who were afraid to be recorded because they thought there was going to be retaliation against them. And I hope that that's the case. Is that I hope that they wouldn't think that I was going to retaliate or use it against it anyway, because I feel like I had a pretty good reputation of that organization of fighting for the people and for my employees, but like I said, they were aware that it was going to be anonymous. Nothing was going to be recorded as far as their names. It was just going to be age, gender, and ethnic or cultural background. That was recorded, as well as whether they're a firefighter or a lieutenant, and then obviously their responses. And I made sure that within there, I also told them too, when you were thinking of something, when you were responding, if there was someone that came to mind, don't say their name. If there was someone that we were talking about a positive leader, don't say their name. If it was negative, don't say their name about that one either, because I wanted to make sure that there was nothing that could be construed as attacking or retaliating against anyone else. Um, so that was a big factor of that. So let's dig into the findings now. And I apologize. Like I said, we're over an hour into this, and I'm now just getting to the findings, but I promise I'll dig through this quick. So the findings after these interviews were conducted, the first section of it was our themes that were discovered, right? So one of the things that was discovered specifically that we're looking for is our positive leadership characteristics, because we're looking again how leadership styles and how leadership can impact and the challenges that leaders face in motivating those firefighters. The overall portion of it is that the motivation will lead to, or the lack of motivation rather, will lead to turnover intent or turnover of the organization, creating staffing crises. But going back to that, how does the leadership impact that morale? How does it impact the challenges of motivating those firefighters? So we dug into it and said, all right, the positive leadership characteristics that were mentioned. Number one, by far, was leading by example. And like I said, I thought for sure servant leadership was going to be all the way up there, but it wasn't. Leading by example was the number one mentioned uh, characteristic there, attribute for leaders. And really, really, really cool stuff, because every single person that was mentioning it was saying the exact same thing. They were saying, well, we want this because of this. So let me pull it up real quick. We had 14 of the responses that said leading by example was the number one, the positive leadership style that they wanted to work under. They wanted to see a leader who was willing to do the job themselves and be that example. So they said that, if someone was positive, they would be positive. If someone was willing to train, they were willing to train. If someone was willing to go the extra mile for a citizen or a patient, they were willing to go the extra mile, which I thought was extremely interesting. Again, that the servant leadership wasn't the one that they wanted to work under, because you think from an aspect of self-serving, you would want your leader to serve you. Oh, I want my leader to serve me because I want to be served. But the reality of it was that leading by example is number one. I think, again, this is an opinion based. I think that a lot of that comes down to they themselves are already servant leaders and they just don't realize it. So they're not looking to be served. They're looking to serve the next person in line, and everyone's looking to serve each other. And I think that's a big, big factor of that. And that's why it wasn't really mentioned. Another one was mentioned 10 times, which is mentoring. That they wanted a leader that was willing to mentor, that was willing to train them, that was willing to go the extra mile and try to grow that person and mentor that person. After that was flexible leadership, which again is a big factor, because that's kind of where we got the entire name for unbranded leadership, is that you have to be a flexible leader. It was mentioned in there that the leadership styles that a officer or a leader possesses and utilizes on a fire should be different than what they possess and utilize at the station. And the ones that were able to do that efficiently and positively were seen as better leaders than ones that were trying to stick with a singular style through and through. Another big aspect of it was ownership. Multiple times I heard people saying that they wanted a leader that owned situations, they owned problems, they owned the station. They said that this is my bubble and I'm going to control my bubble, even if everything else around me is falling apart. I own this station. And that's really important, because as we dig into it a little bit, uh, in the next category there, you're going to see, or actually a couple categories from now, you're going to see the establishment of a micro and macro culture. And that kind of ties directly into this ownership aspect. Negative ownership styles, or ownership, negative leadership styles, rather. The number one negative leadership style that was mentioned by 18 respondents, and I think this is important because it was mentioned from lieutenants as well as firefighters, was the micromanager. They said over and over and over again that they absolutely disliked working for a micromanager. A lot of the statements that were in there were talking about how they had experiences where a micromanager would assign them something, they would begin to work on that, and then they would come back and go, "Why didn't you do it this way?" And they're like, "Well, if you wanted it done that way, why didn't you tell me to do it that way?" So they had a lot of almost animosity and anger toward a micromanager, someone who was constantly telling them, not only giving them an assignment, but telling them exactly how to achieve that assignment. There's one person that mentioned actually on a call where they were given an assignment of, um, ventilating a structure or something, and the in-depth amount of information that was given over the radio was just absurd. Of, hey, I want you to go to the Bravo side. You're going to do a horizontal ventilation. You're going to bust out this window here, and basically breaking it down to the absolute nitty gritty of it, and how he couldn't stand working for that person because of the level of micromanagement. Another one was laziness, which kind of goes back to the opposite of the mentorship one or the leading by example one. They said that they absolutely despised working for lazy leaders, ones that were on the couch before they were, training, the ones that didn't care about the job, the ones that were basically in what they called retirement mode. So that's another important leadership attribute to stay away from. And then finally, it was do as I say, not as I do, was described as one on there, which is basically they were the director and telling them what to do, but they weren't willing to do it themselves. They weren't willing to do these things. I want you to be positive, but I'm going to talk bad about the department every chance I can. I want you to go out and clean your trucks and make sure your uniform's spotless. Meanwhile, their shirt was untucked and their boots are not, polished or something like that. So again, big, big sway of leadership characteristics that were seen deemed positive and negative. The next section or theme that was developed or discovered was the motivators of the firefighters. So we saw, we dug into a lot of it of what their intrinsic and extrinsic motivations were without necessarily asking what their intrinsic and extrinsic motivations were, because a lot of it would require definitions and everything like that, and kind of trying to, for lack of better terms, that giving the definition of an intrinsic or an extrinsic would lead to a guiding question or a leading question. So I didn't want to dig into it that much where I had to explain that because of that fact. But intrinsically, what we saw with a lot of the firefighters was that they got into this job and their one of their main desires was to help others. And like we said before, we hear this in every single interview. Why do you want to be a fireman? Oh, I want to help others. I want to help people. Okay, great. So I was happy to see that because I kind of assumed that that was going to occur. Another big one that I necessarily didn't necessarily think about, and this is probably it's probably because I've been in the office a little too long and I've probably been out of the field a little too long. But one of the big ones for intrinsic motivations was camaraderie. The fact of being a team player and being on a crew and being with a good crew. Multiple times I heard that the reason why culture or morale was good was because of their crew, their camaraderie. They sought to have camaraderie. They sought to be a part of a team. They sought to be a valuable asset to their brothers and sisters. And that was a big one for the intrinsic motivation. And then finally, the last one was desire to be the best. And that goes back to, again, that fifth level of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs is the desire to improve, the desire to hit that self-actualization. And again, really, really happy to hear that the desire to be the best is still there. It also goes back to the fact that the competition aspect, they want to be the best. Well, what's the best? It's competing against my brothers and sisters and saying, look, I'm better than you. Which, I mean, we can take that for what it is and say, oh, well, they're just comparing, but still, that desire to be there, to be the best is a good thing. We want people who want to set the bar higher and not just do the bare minimum. Extrinsic motivations. The two biggest ones that we saw for extrinsic motivations was work-life balance, going back to like scheduling and time off, as well as not being mandatory overtime. That was a big, big one that was mentioned multiple times, is mandating, maybe being mandated to work overtime, which for anyone who doesn't know is basically they wake up at 7 a.m. about to get off work and they're given a phone call and say, hey, you have to work 24 more hours, regardless of what you have going on at home or your plans. So really, really big aspect of that, of the work-life balance, was not having to be mandated to work overtime unless they wanted to work overtime. And then obviously having that time off to be with family, to be with friends, to do hobbies and everything like that. And then the other one was pay. I think pay was mentioned. I would say 95% or so mentioned pay. A lot of people were talking about it, that they just needed a wage to get by on. They just needed to be able to survive, and that they loved working for the organization. They loved working on their crews, but they couldn't survive on what they were being paid. So that was one that was mentioned over and over and over again, which again substantiates the idea of using Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory as the primary theory of everything going on when it comes to motivating and leading firefighters. Other things that were noted, other themes, the impact of leadership on morale. This is where we started digging into the micro and macro culture. So when we're talking about the impact of leadership on morale, they noted that there was two distinct categories of morale. And this is something that I hadn't thought of, and I'm really, really glad that they brought this out. And it was the micro slash macro culture. The micro culture was basically saying, okay, from the crew standpoint, the smallest level, the micro level, the morale is high. They said they love working, they love being there, they love being on their crew, they love running the calls, they love training. It's great at the station. But then they said the overall or the macro culture of the department was terrible. Morale is terrible. Nobody wants to be here. Everybody's quitting. I hate this place, blah, blah, blah. But I love the station. And what's funny is this was repeated over and over and over and over again by these firefighters and even the lieutenants as well. Was this delineation between, at the station life is great, the organization was terrible. And I started looking at it, I'm like, I'm confused because I'm interviewing people from all different stations of this organization. If it's so great at their station, and everyone's saying the same thing, then why isn't it great from the macro level, from the organizational level? And what I started to realize is that they linked the extrinsic motivators of pay and time off to the organizational, the macro level, which is fair enough. They can't control that at the station, the crew, or anything like that. And then you look at the intrinsic level, the camaraderie, the desire to be the best, the ability to help others, that was met at the crew level. So the intrinsic needs were being met. The extrinsic needs were not being met. And because of that, going back to Maslow's, unless that pay and that survival aspect is met, you're not going to have the ability to move up the ladder there. So from an intrinsic level, things are good. Extrinsically, they're bad. So the micro or intrinsic was good. The macro or extrinsic aspect of it was bad. Then what I also started noticing was social morale, and I don't remember who the lieutenant is that coined this term during it, social morale. Um, but I'm so glad he did because it is a phenomenal concept that we kind of talked about within this research project. Is that there's a individual morale and then there's the social morale. There's the group morale, the group think, and this was exposed so clearly during our focus groups that I can't, you have to read it. It's amazing. The individuals would say that morale at the stations is great, but morale at the department is terrible. And then I would put them into focus groups, the same people into focus groups. And immediately it was the morale sucks everywhere. Morale at the stations is bad. Morale at the organization is bad. Everybody's bad. Negative, negative, negative. And I was like, whoa, where did this come from? But what I started realizing was that the people, when they would be together, the first thing that they would do is go to a negative aspect because again, this is my opinion. It appears that they assume that the negative conversation, the negative talk would be more accepted with their peers rather than anything positive. So that's the first thing they went to. The first thing they started talking about was how bad pay is and how bad the department is, as well as their individual crews, how bad it was on their individual crews. And I'm like, wow, that's wild. Then I started noticing with a couple of individuals specifically that they were also saying it in the interview portion when it was one on one. The one thing that they had in common, the ones that we're talking about in the interview as well as the focus group, was that they were in a position that's an assignment that's called a floater, in which they don't have a specific crew. They don't have a regular crew that they're working with every single shift. Instead, they go and fill in to any open spot. Someone's on overtime or there's an opening that's not filled, they'll plug them into it and they'll move all across the department. So they're constantly moving from station to station. They're constantly that outsider. So when they're that outsider, again, the first thing that they talk about when they get to that station is negative, negative, negative. Everything's terrible. Everything sucks. I don't want to be here. And they take that with them from station to station. So when I did the individual interview with them, of course, they said everything's terrible, crew as well as the department. The ones that had a consistent station said crew is great, everything else is terrible on the interview. But in the focus group, everyone said everything is terrible, crew's terrible, everything. So very, very interesting themes that were discovered with that. That definitely needs some more looking into, but it was very interesting, very, very apparent that having that camaraderie and having that consistent crew can really impact the morale and the turnover intent of the people. Another one was our improvement of leadership. So when we start talking about things that could be done to improve leadership, what two things came up that were found pretty pretty commonly, and that was communication and mentoring. So it was mentioned multiple times that communication was one of the factors of the micro macro culture, that the communication that occurs within a crew, because it's face to face, is strong. They know what they each desires, they know what they want to do, they know what their goals are because they're constantly talking to them. Communication from the department, specifically from senior staff, was horrendous. They said that they have no idea where the department's going. They have no idea what the department wants to do next, what the goals, what the mission was, what the vision of the department, that none of them had any idea of what was going on. They said that the lack of communication from up top down was causing or was one of the causes of a decrease in morale as well as decrease or increase in turnover intent because they didn't know what was going on. They just saw things were bad and nobody's talking about it. Therefore, they must desire for things to be bad. The other aspect was the mentoring portion of it. And they said that the mentoring or the desire for someone to, and again, this is why I was mentioned as a positive leadership characteristic, is they wanted to work for people who wanted to bring them up, to mentor them to be better, to guide them, to bring them up. And they said that there was a distinct breakdown between the levels of lieutenant and the next highest level, which is district chief. They said that again, when you're in the station with the lieutenant and you have that direct supervisor, there's mentoring that's going on, and that's a very common thing, and that's very important to them. The lieutenants, however, said that outside of that, because they didn't have a chief that's working directly with them, they didn't receive any mentoring. They weren't getting anything out of it. It was just kind of a oversight type of relationship. Like, hey, they'd come by once a day or, once every couple of shifts or whatever, just to say hi, make sure things were good. And that was it. Beyond that, they never heard from chiefs level officers at all from the senior staff. Again, going back to the communication aspect of it. So that mentoring gap was occurring between the first level of leadership and the second level of leadership. And it appeared to be completely um, absent from that third level on up or second level on up. Um, Relationship of the findings to the problem. So we talked about this a little bit already of the difference between turnover and turnover intent. And this is one of the factors that we saw, and there was a study that I reviewed and I utilized multiple times within the research project because it's a really, really good one. And it talked about a research that was done at a hospital on nurses. And the nurses were talking about the impacts that occur when someone leaves an organization. And they said that the actual turnover is not as dangerous as turnover intent is. So when turnover occurs, basically someone leaves an organization that leaves a hole, it leaves a gap. Now that organization has to fill that gap with whatever personnel. And this is where the fire department, nursing for the most part, and other organizations like this are a little bit different than the regular business category, where I could sit there and say, okay, Johnny calls out sick one day. Great, we just don't fill a spot, and whatever his work was, he'll catch up when he gets back. At the fire department, we have seats that have to be filled. We have positions that have to be filled. So that requires mandating overtime if nobody wants to voluntarily take it. So when someone calls out sick or someone quits, and now we have a hole that's in that seat that needs to be filled, someone's going to get mandated to that, which increases their stress level of not only the person that got mandated, but it's also going to increase the stress level of everybody else who's on that list that could potentially get mandated because they're like, oh my gosh, I might have to get stuck working another shift. Big, big factor for them. So that's increasing that burnout, increasing that stress level for them. Now, what happens when that occurs 10 times in a month? Okay, well, now everyone's getting stressed out. Well, now all of a sudden, that turnover, that actual turnover of 10 people, now turns into the turnover intent of 100 people. And when that turnover intent of 100 people happens, now we start going down the spiral because what are they talking about? They're talking about leaving the entire time. And regardless of whether they're actually qualified or they actually have applications out and they're really going to leave, the fact that they're talking about it is already resonating with everyone around them that, oh my gosh, this person's leaving, this person's leaving, this person's leaving. And it relates right back to the fact that they have already seats that aren't being filled. And what does that do to them? Well, if they're all leaving, I got to leave too. And it creates this huge spiral that just gets out of control and just kills the morale of the entire organization. On top of it, it creates a gigantic barrier now for leaders to be able to motivate their guys because their guys already have one foot out the door. Again, whether it's actually going to happen or not, in their head and in their idea, they have one foot out the door. So this was a big, big connection that we saw between the morale and how it led to turnover intent and how turnover intent led to a reduction in morale. And again, it all kind of went back to intrinsic levels were being met, intrinsic motivators were being met, but the extrinsics were not. So, how do we improve the leadership in the fire department? Those were the findings. That's basically the findings and the gist of the project and the research project. Let's dig into now what we can do to make things better. And that's the whole purpose of this, was to make not only Brevard County Fire Rescue better, but to make the fire service in general better. Again, let's leave it better than we found it. So the first one is formal leadership training. Of the people that I interviewed, one person noted that they had formal leadership training. One. And when I say formal leadership training, I meant that was something that was an actual concrete, put together, planned class or training specific to formal leadership outside of the fire officer certification, because fire officer does have a class in there. It's called fire officer. Yeah, weird. It's called fire officer, but it talks about leadership, and it's a very small caveat of the actual program and everything. But beyond that, one person had formal leadership training, and they got that from the military. And I'm like, man, that hits hard, because one of the positions that I was in when I was there was I was trying to create an officer academy that involved leadership, not just from the tactical and strategic standpoint, but also from the soft skills, from leadership and everything like that. And it was almost embarrassing to hear that. But formal leadership training is absolutely essential to teach not only the positive attributes, but also the coaching and the mentoring portions of that, so that people know what to do as leaders. Because a lot of the times they're just thrust into this position. They have no freaking clue what they're doing. Hey, congratulations, you scored high enough on a test. You're now in charge of this crew, and go. Hope for the best. And again, a lot of times, especially from that first level of leadership to the second level of leadership, the lieutenant to the district chief, there wasn't any mentoring going on. So they had no idea of what they were going to expect. It was really baptism by fire. The second one for improving leadership is leading by example. And again, that goes back to our formal leadership training, but also our mentoring. If we have leaders that are all leading by example, the people that are underneath them, that are following them, are going to follow, and they're going to exemplify that exact same style when they become a leader. They will continue to lead by example, and it kind of just flows downward. What happens though is when we start to promote people into higher positions that don't exemplify that, they're not the example of leading by example, and instead they're the ones that are, do as I say, not as I do, or they're the micromanager. And it starts throwing everything off, because they see that person get promoted and go, well, obviously those are the attributes and characteristics that the department wants. I should be like that. And they start following the bad and the negative leadership styles. And then all of a sudden it just starts to fall apart. Um, Another one for improving leadership within the fire department is increasing camaraderie with consistent crews. And this goes back to what I was just talking about. What we noticed with the floater position, and what we noticed with the high turnover rates, where you had people that are constantly being mandated and working on different crews. And that's not to say it's a bad thing to work on a different crew. You need to get outside your comfort zone. You need to work with other people, because you might be working with them on a call, and you need to learn from whatever you can from them, just like you learn from your own crew. But having that consistent crew that you're constantly with, and that you're growing with, and that you're living with, and having that true fire family is really important for morale, and for, again, controlling that bubble. And I hate the word control, but that's kind of what we're talking about here, is controlling your bubble. As a lieutenant, their bubble is that station, that crew. If they can keep control of that, and they can keep a positive environment, a positive atmosphere through training, through growth and mentoring and coaching, and through, you know, uh, kind of limiting any negative situations that occur there, then they're doing good. But when you get to a district chief level, now you expanded that bubble. Now your bubble is an entire district on that shift. And then it keeps on going up bigger and bigger until you get to the fire chief, who's overseeing the entire bubble. But it doesn't change anything. You still have to control whatever bubble you're in charge of. One way of doing that is making sure that you have consistency within those crews, because they know what you expect and you know what they expect. And now you're able to match that and meet those motivations and meet those expectations of each other. Going back to that social exchange theory, this is, I know what they want, they know what I want. Now we're able to meet each other's needs, and we're able to engage in that work relationship, right? Um, Communication strategy is another one. Communication strategy is absolutely critical. Goes back to exactly what we were just talking about, and that the communication aspect of it. at a local level, at a small level, the micro culture level occurs all the time. When I walk into the station, I'm in constant communication with my leadership, with my lieutenant. However, there still has to be intentional communication strategies that are occurring. I need to be intentional in that I'm making sure to mentor and coach those that are underneath me. Going up the chain, that needs to happen every single rank, that you're constantly, intentionally coaching and mentoring the people below you, not only for succession planning, but also to make sure that they understand what your intent is and you understand what their intent is. Going back to the expectations again, expectations need to be known on both sides of the relationship in order for it to be successful. And when you start to create those gaps, all of a sudden you'll see those holes forming everywhere. I like to call it Swiss cheese. If you give someone Swiss cheese, they're going to fill the holes with something. If your communications aren't solid and there's holes in your communication strategies going from the top down to the bottom, somewhere along the line, someone's going to fill that hole with something, whether it's the right thing or not. And all of a sudden, that's what it is. That's what the proof is. That's what the communication, what the message is whatever that was filled with those holes. Usually it's not the right things. It's always rumors and drama and everything else that gets filled into those holes, but that becomes the message at that point. So communication strategies need to be intentful. They need to be common or not common, but concise, and they need to have to happen often. And then finally is our another suggestion for improving leadership that was mentioned within the research study was strategic planning that matches Maslow's hierarchy. Again, going back to social exchange theory, we have expectations. Everybody has an expectation of another person. We have to meet those expectations. Well, we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs that basically breaks down what the expectations are of our employee. It gives us all five levels. All we have to do is match them. So, utilizing that as a strategic planning guide and template is absolutely critical to be able to say, okay, first First thing we need to do, all in on hitting level one. Great. We went all in, we hit level one, we're doing good. Our people are able to survive, they're able to be paid, they're able to have their work-life balance. We're doing good. Let's go to number two. Let's work on health. Okay, we need to increase units potentially to reduce the amount of call volume so that we can reduce burnout. We can increase the amount of sleep that they have so they're able to make better decisions. We can increase their overall health, give them time to work out, give them time to make dinner so they're not eating fast food every single shift because they're constantly getting hit by call after call after call. Great. We hit that one. Next, number three, we go to the third level and we say, okay, how can we increase camaraderie? Well, let's get together. Training is the best one for that. Getting together and training, not only the crews individually, but also the crews within the district and saying, okay, everybody's going to get together. We're all going to eat dinner together. I'm going to, as the lieutenant, I'm going to enforce that the entire crew eats dinner together. Even if Johnny's a bodybuilder on a different diet, at least he's eating with us at the table together and we have that decompression, we have that discussion, we have that building and that bonding that's occurring. That's important. So going and creating that camaraderie. Fourth, we look into it and say, okay, how can we build up our respect factor? Well, that's easy too. That goes back to our training aspect of it. That goes back to our teaching our people how to be leaders, teaching them how to have those skills to do the various different aspects of our job. So they build up that respect. They build up that natural leadership capability. They take on the senior firefighter role or whatever it may be and build up that self-esteem. And then fifth and finally, we teach them, okay, now is the time for self-actualization. How do we make them so that they want to be the best? They want to promote. They want to increase responsibility and increase their impact and their influence on the organization. And that really comes back to the mentoring and coaching. You know, if we create a mentoring and coaching strategy and a whole program for this, we're going to convince people, we're going to influence people to be the best. We're going to empower them. We're going to utilize that servant leadership, that transformational leadership to make them the best person they can possibly be. So that needs to happen. And finally, to close out the entire research project, because I'm exhausted of talking, and I think I'm already out of water now too. The final portions of it were the recommendations for further study. And this is, and every research project has this because there's things that occur that you find that you discover and you go, oh man, That's something that we should look into. Oh, we need to figure this out. We created all this research and we filled all these different gaps. And in the process, we created like 30 more gaps that we need to research and figure out in order to continue pushing our knowledge and our education and academics and application of all of this further. So the two things that were the real recommendations from this that need to be further studied is A, how much money is enough? We talked about money. We talked about hitting that survival aspect of level one of Maslow's hierarchy. But what's enough? What is survivable and what is enough to say, okay, I want to stay here regardless of what the not necessarily pay, but saying, okay, this is enough money where I've all my intrinsic needs are met. This intrinsic need was met enough for me to stay. I'm happy. And I don't know what that is. And I don't know that we can really generalize that because a lot of it's going to be based on your location. It's going to be based on the cost of living where you're at. California pays a ton more than Florida, but it also costs a ton more to live in California. So it's almost on a sliding scale of what that's going to be. However, for Brevard County, they need to figure that out. What is that magic number of how much money is enough? And how much is enough to keep everyone surviving at the different ranks, the different values, the different amounts of responsibility that they have at those different ranks to make sure that people still want to move into those ranks because there is going to be that potential where someone says, I don't make enough to handle all the headaches that that rank has to deal with. And when that happens, that's another failure point that they need to investigate. Another one is the impact of the floater position. We talked about this a lot of camaraderie and the consistency of crews and making sure that they're consistent and that they have that fire family aspect and that they're constantly with each other. So what a lot of research needs to be done on the impact of the floater position and whether this really is a valuable position. I mean, the idea of it that they're going to be utilized to reduce overtime and specifically reduce mandatory overtime, it makes sense. It 100% makes sense. But at the same time, is it better to maybe say we'll have an additional person on each crew that's part of that crew and they fill in if an opening occurs on that crew? And then last case scenario, maybe they get floated out to another station. I don't know. I don't know what the financial impact of that might be. But we see here the morale and the emotional impact and how it affects turnover intent. So there's definitely a lot to that that needs to be further investigated there. So, with that being said, that is pretty much the overview of the entire research project for the doctorate program that I did. Um, a lot of information was found, a lot of themes were discovered. Really, really fantastic stuff. And to be honest with you, it definitely sparked a desire for me to research more and to get into this research aspect of the fire service and utilizing this data to not only, improve things like response times and the care that we provide, but really to improve the leadership and how we treat our employees and how we grow our employees. So, really good stuff. I was very, very blessed to be able to conduct this study, to have the response and the respondents of the participants of the study. And I hope that it does leave the fire service a little better than I found it. Again, if you guys want to read the entire study, to download it, to utilize it in part or in whole, visit unbrandedleadership.com and I'll have it available for download. And again, all I ask is if you do utilize it, just give me some credit for it. So if you did like this episode, or if you have any suggestions for future episodes, such as guests or topics or anything like that, please reach out to me, either message me, comment in the comment section below, or email me. And like and subscribe as always. And please share too. Share the information that you're gathering and that you're getting, especially if it's applicable to your position as a leader. So thank you guys, and we will see you next time.